going to have you sign a book for this gentleman because of the top 5 questions.
Okay.
This was the one that received the most votes, and it's a question on Iraq. Since the day U.S. forces found the cache of biological suits and gas masks in Iraq during the war, I've held to my belief that Saddam did indeed have weapons of mass destruction, and we didn't find them because they were moved, possibly to Syria. Do you still believe that Iraq did, in fact, have these weapons, or do you think that all of the overwhelming intelligence pointing in that direction was indeed flawed?
The only thing I can say to the listener with certainty is that Saddam Hussein was 1, dangerous, 2, was an enemy, and 3, had the capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. He had used them, and before, by the way. And had we turned a blind eye to his regime, in other words, had I not decided to deal with a problem before it became acute, there's no doubt in my mind he would be using oil revenues today to fuel or to pay for a weapons of mass destruction program. And the country, I make the case in the book that the country and the world are much better off without Saddam Hussein in power, whether we found weapons of mass destruction or not. Obviously, this is a very controversial subject, and one of the reasons I've written the book is to walk the reader through what it was like to make the decision to liberate Iraq. And people can draw their own conclusions about the decision I made. But
you make it very clear in the book that it's upsetting to this day that ultimately they were not found. A lot of our listeners believe that he moved them. There were stories and books written about flights going on and anything else.
The interesting thing about history is that the truth will eventually be known. In my book, I lay out the case for why the removal of Saddam made sense. I truly believe democracy will work in Iraq, and I do believe that the world in the Middle East will be better off. I'm a believer in the universality of freedom. In other words, I believe deep in everybody's soul is the desire to be free. I happen to believe it's a gift from the Almighty. And if the United States helps these young democracies thrive, it'll have a transformative effect in a part of the world that from which danger emanated. One of the interesting things, Scott, I put in my book is my relationship with the Japanese Prime Minister Koizumi. On September the 12th, he called and said, Japan will work with the United States to enhance our mutual security and spread freedom as the alternative to those who killed people on our soil. What was ironic is my dad fought the Japanese. 60 years later, his son is working with the Prime Minister of the former enemy to promote peace. Freedom is transformative.
Another question on Iraq, and this has to do with some political decisions you talk about in the book about when to announce some changes on Iraq. And a friend of mine in the oil business took exception actually to one of the decisions you talk about in the book that said, we've made a series of decisions. We're not going to announce them because we're in the middle of a very political time before the midterm election in 2006. And he said, Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House as a result of that, and look at the damage that has done to the economy. In that person's view,
I disagree with that person's view. First of all, I don't know whether or not any kind of decision based upon national security would have affected the elections. Secondly, when you're the commander-in-chief, you cannot send a signal to your troops that you're making decisions based upon politics. And thirdly, I do walk the reader through the process about making the decision on the surge. And it is, I would argue, and the book argues, that the process is much more complicated than it may appear on the surface.
We had a lot of questions about your faith in the book, and I want to share a few of those with you as well and give you a chance to talk about. One, Brant in Pelican Rapids said, as a man grounded in your Christian faith, which is admired by many, what steps or actions did you take on a daily basis to continue your close walk with the Lord?
Well, that's a fabulous question. I happen to be somebody that needs discipline in my life, particularly with my faith, and therefore I read the Bible every day of my presidency. I, of course, attended church as well. In other words, I do believe there's spirituality in a community of believers. And so Laura and I went to church, whether it be across the street from the White House or at Camp David. I prayed a lot, and as well began to feel the power of prayers from total strangers. The problem with that statement I just made is I can't prove it to you, Scott, or your listener, but I can tell you that my time in the White House was strengthened by prayer, and that my time there was joyous. there were obviously moments of difficulty and moments of high drama, but when I look back on the experience, it was a joyous experience, and I can only attribute it to the intercession prayer.
Another UND student actually says, very few Americans will have the privilege of serving as president. What is the most important thing you've learned about yourself? What is the most important thing you've learned about America after leading the country for 8 years?
I think the most important thing I've learned about myself is how important it is to stick to your principles. The temptation in politics, and probably in life for that matter, is to compromise your core beliefs in order to make people like you. And a president can't do that. And I was most proud of the fact that when I got home, I looked in the mirror and know I didn't sell my soul to politics. Secondly, I believe that America is a country that produces unbelievable citizenry. I don't miss much about the presidency. Of course, I miss being pampered. But
Air Force One wasn't a bad perk.
That or the White House chef, but I really do miss being the commander-in-chief. It was such an awesome experience to be able to salute men and women who wear our uniform, who volunteered in the face of danger, and they're symbolic of the courage and sacrifice of many of our citizens in uniform and out of uniform.
We had a lot of questions that wanted advice, and one was, what is your advice to young people who are interested in politics and are considering running for office?
My advice is that, my statement is that you don't have to sell your soul in order to go into politics. You can compromise tactics, but you never have to compromise your principles. Secondly, my advice is do it, because the system is only as good as the willingness of honest, decent people to become involved.
Another from Dennis in Lawton, North Dakota. What was your greatest frustration working with Congress? What would you change in the American system of government?
Well, my greatest frustration was Congress couldn't look beyond the horizon. In other words, they're pretty risk adverse. So, for example, when it came time to reforming Social Security, a issue that I tackled vigorously and laid out a solution to tackling Social Security, Congress really was concerned about losing power or losing their seats for tackling such a difficult issue. I think we really ought to examine how we draw our congressional districts, because most districts are so safe that people need to only worry about being primaried, and therefore it causes people to drift, one extreme or another to prevent losing a primary. And I think if the districts were drawn more reasonably, it would cause people to have to campaign for the soul of the electorate at large, and I think it affect the country in a positive way.
Here's the final question. Brad in Moorhead says, a lot of questions about the media, a lot of them. This one, he said, I always hated it when the dinosaur media would ask you what you felt your biggest mistake was, so they could then get you to admit blame. They just wanted you to label you with anyway. So my question is the opposite. What do you hope will be your biggest contribution that you would like the United States citizens historically to remember you for?
Well, I appreciate that. First of all, just as a general principle, I really didn't resent the press. I viewed it, the press, as necessary for me to do my job. Secondly, if I didn't like the press, I had the ability to ignore them, like don't watch them, for example, which I generally did, by the way, not watch them. But I hope my biggest contribution is that in the face of danger, I kept the country safe. The most important job of the president is to protect the American people. My presidency happened to be one where 3,000 people died in one tragic day, and it defined my presidency, and it affected me deeply, and it still affects me when I think about that day. I fully recognize that time will kind of help heal that wound for people. In other words, as time moves way past September the 11th, 2001, people will forget the risks our country faced. I never did as president, and I still don't as a former president. And I just hope that our government fully recognizes that there are still people that would like to do us harm, and that ultimately those people will lose their capacity to recruit as freedom takes hold in parts of the world that are desperate for freedom.
Of the 300 questions we received to submit to you, about a third of them wanted to invite you to come see us in Fargo. You were nice enough during your presidency to come a couple times, so the invite is open for you to come back.
Well, North Dakota is a fabulous state. I've got some dear friends there. I look forward to bringing my mountain bike up and riding some of the trails there. only after the snow melts.
The book is fabulous, and we appreciate so much your time today. Thanks.
You're a good man, Scott. Thank you. Scott, thank you. Scott, thank you. Scott, thank you. Scott, thank you.